Did that work? Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Thank you. Okay, so we are actually going to get started with a video from the Carpenters Health and Welfare Fund. So hopefully when I click this, you can see and hear the video.
Good evening. My name is Joe Obahowitz, and I'm the Fund Director of the Carpenters Benefit Funds of Philadelphia. I'm joined by my counterpart from the Northeast Carpenter Funds, Fund Director Ian Rug, and our mental health provider, MHC, to help raise awareness of mental health and substance abuse disorder, which include alcohol, illegal, and prescription drug addiction. Each year, millions of Americans face the reality of living with these issues. Dealing with a substance abuse, alcoholism, or drug addiction is never easy, and it's even more difficult when you're struggling with a mental health problem.
Together, we can realize our shared vision to help bring awareness on the importance of mental health and let you know that we are here to help. 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. 1 in 10 Americans aged 12 and older are addicted to alcohol or drugs. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14 and 75% by age 24. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. Approximately 70% of people with a mental health disorder or addiction do not seek help. Mental health and addiction do not discriminate based on race, color, gender, or identity. Anyone can experience these challenges regardless of their background.
Unfortunately, the construction industry is not immune and is actually higher from a percentage standpoint to these disorders. We want to let you know that we are here to help. Please pay attention to the presentation, and if you or a family member needs help, reach out to the fund offices or MHC directly for assistance. All the contact information is in the presentation or can be found on our respective websites. Let's break the stigma, don't be a statistic, and don't be too proud to ask for help.
Okay, so really what Joe and Ian are highlighting is that mental illness and substance abuse has been around for a really long time, but a lot of people were drastically impacted during the pandemic. Many people are experiencing symptoms that they haven't felt before. They don't particularly like it. And so what we hope to do tonight is really highlight this behavioral health umbrella for all of you to make sure you have a better understanding as to what to look out for yourself, for someone else who might be struggling, and the different ways to access help through your benefits.
Good evening. My name is Joe.
Playing it again. Okay. All right, great. So the first slide that we're going to talk about tonight is looking at stress. Now, stress is openly discussed, right? So we often talk about our stressful day to our friends, colleagues, partners. We tend to say, oh, work was very stressful, parenting is stressful, relationships are stressful. So stress we're pretty comfortable with. I like to call it a safe topic, okay? So stress is commonly discussed, and people feel like they can connect when talking about stress because everyone is stressed, right? But what exactly is stress? So the slide here is talking about stress being an imbalance between your current coping abilities and the expectations or demands that are placed on you. Okay, now one thing that's important to remember is that stress often gets a bad rap. So what we mean by that is that we associate stress with things that are negative, right? But stress can often be very helpful in terms of preparing for something or overcoming a challenge. Think about the last time that you had maybe an exam or an interview to go on. If you were stressed, chances are you did pretty well because the stress is what drove you to make sure you had a good understanding of what was going to be on the exam or what you were going to say in the interview. Okay. Similarly, think of really positive experiences in our lives, like new jobs, weddings, graduation. They're so exciting, but they're often talked about in conversation with how stressful it can be. Okay, so don't get that mixed up. Just because something is a positive experience doesn't mean that it can't cause you to feel stressed. Now, given the year that we've just had with dealing with the pandemic, right, for longer than a year at this point, look at the chart that's on this slide. we have to keep in mind that as we're stressed for an extended amount of time, there is a correlation with our performance, okay? So at first we start out, we're moderately stressed, we're doing really well. And then when we get to that peak where we're too high, if we don't start to manage our stress well, our performance is going to come down. Okay, you're going to feel overwhelmed. That's when people talk about burnout. It's when you're feeling too stressed for too long of a period of time. Okay, now I was actually reading an article this morning, and the article was talking about doctors are reporting an increase in patients who are coming into their offices and reporting a fogginess. Okay, they're not able to focus, poor attention, forgetting things that they wouldn't otherwise forget. And the doctors are contributing to it, to this long period of stress, which is the pandemic. The good news is that the article did go on to talk about how people do tend to be resilient. And once we establish some type of, new normal and things de-stress, we'll say, that the fogginess should go away. But I know I've heard a lot of people, myself, talk about that, just feeling foggy during the pandemic. So it's likely attributed to stress. Okay, so looking at COVID and how it impacts mental health and substance abuse, there have been alarming increases in terms of the amount of people that are now reporting some type of mental illness or some type of substance use disorder. So this slide here states that there has been a major increase in the number of adults who report symptoms of anxiety and depression during the pandemic. There's also an increase in the use of alcohol and drugs, specifically in an attempt to try to cope with the uncertainty that came with the last year. Okay, so as you can see, this chart here on the slide highlights a lot of things that people experience, like loneliness. A lot of people were unemployed. People didn't really know what was going to happen next, and therefore, as a result, you have an influx in the symptoms. So where does this lead us? Well, it leads us to a conversation about mental health, okay? And it might be a conversation that's long overdue. So what we're going to look at first is this idea of behavioral health. Now, oftentimes when people call into MHC, they say, I need to access my behavioral health benefit. Are you the person that I call? Right? And so think of behavioral health as an umbrella. It is the blanket term which includes mental health inside, okay? So you have your umbrella, and on one side we have mental health, on the other side we have substance abuse. People use them interchangeably, but it's just an umbrella term for it, really. So behavioral health looks at how behaviors impact someone's physical health. Behavioral health describes the connection between behaviors and the health and well-being of the body, mind, and spirit. So this would include how behaviors like eating habits, drinking, or exercising can impact your physical or mental health. So think about someone who's struggling mentally, okay? Mentally and emotionally, they might be out of whack. They often report changes to their sleep or appetite. Well, sleeping and eating are actually behaviors, okay? So they're behavioral, but they're being impacted by this mental health issue, okay? So you can hopefully see how we're making the connection here. On the substance use side, substance use and abuse would fall under that behavioral health umbrella. However, the substances might lead someone to engage in risky behaviors like driving under the influence. So now you have the substance use, which is causing a behavioral response, just like the eating and the sleeping. Okay, so I hope that helps, shed some light on this term of behavioral health that people often don't know what it means. It's just a broad term for mental health and substance abuse. Okay, so the next slide here is looking at what is mental health. Now, the World Health Organization put out this definition that's listed on the slide in front of you. But we're going to talk about mental health as falling on a continuum, okay? So we're going to range from mentally unhealthy or struggling to mentally healthy, okay? So good mental health, if someone is mentally healthy, they're in control control of their emotions. They have good cognitive functioning, and the interactions with people around them are going really well. They might be successful at work, they might be getting along with friends, things like that. But think about this continuum as something that we move along throughout our entire lives. Depending on what's happening in someone's life, it could cause them to go towards mentally healthy or towards mentally unhealthy. Okay. And one important thing to remember is that we don't often realize where we are when we're there. Sometimes we don't recognize the severity of the situation. Maybe we've slid back a couple notches on the continuum, and we're going towards the mentally unhealthy part, right? We're stressed. We've been living in a pandemic for the last year. Maybe you're unemployed. Maybe your loved one is sick. All these things could be happening in our lives. And you're just slowly, notch by notch, going towards the mentally unhealthy side. You might not realize it. And it might take for someone else to come up to you and say, "Are you okay?" Right? And then you're able to step back and say, "Am I okay?" And that's what we really hope that you're going to get from this webinar tonight, is the ability to look at yourself, look at someone else, have these conversations about, are we okay? Could we be a little bit more mentally healthy? And then once someone points it out to us, it's up to us to do something with that information. Okay, and so that's where, again, we're hoping that you'll be able to learn something, especially in the next couple slides, to be able to help both yourself and those around you get the help that they need. Okay, so Max, let me just interrupt here and ask how we're doing on your side. Any questions or things that I should pause for, or are we okay to keep going?
I think we're okay.
Okay, great. And I do see there is a 1 on the Q&A, but if you're monitoring that, this webinar is not all about the pandemic, so I'll answer that one. Okay. All right, so next thing, we're going to talk about mental health, okay? So some of the mental health issues we're going to talk about tonight are depression, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, anxiety attacks, and substance use disorders. Okay, so we're going to talk about what these look like in someone else, what they might feel like in you, warning signs, and ways to get help. Now, these topics that are listed on this slide in front of you are the topics that people don't like to talk about, okay? If you remember a few minutes ago when we talked about stress, I said stress was safe. You'll meet people after work, you know, maybe for dinner, and they'll say, "How was your day?" And you're like, "Oh my goodness, it was so stressful." And that's okay. We'll have a conversation about it. It's fine. But these topics, people are not as comfortable talking about. So one example that I can give you is that I teach at a local university, and I teach students who are aspiring therapists, okay? And I try to get them to think about mental health, the stigma of mental health in our society, and I challenge them to think about how comfortable they are talking about mental health. And you know, they're the students in my class, so they're trying to impress me, and they're like, "Oh, absolutely, we could talk about mental health, no problem." And I say, "Okay, well, imagine this scenario. You're walking on the street and you make eye contact with someone, and that person says, 'Hi.' So you say, 'Hey, how are you?' We say things like this to people all the time, and then we keep going. Well, what if that person stopped and said to you, 'I'm actually very depressed. I'm having poor sleep, poor appetite, the racing thoughts, my mind racing just keeps me up at night. Sometimes I try self-medicating with a bottle of wine before bed, but that doesn't always help.' Would this be a socially acceptable answer to that, 'Hey, how are you?' What happens when we say to people, 'Hey, how's it going?' Fine. Good, maybe. Good might be a stretch, right? A lot of times in those brief interactions with people where they say, 'Hey,' and you're like, 'Hey, how are you?' Fine. Are we fine? And would it be okay to say if we weren't? This example that I just gave you with someone saying, I'm depressed, can't eat, can't sleep, can't turn my brain off. Think about how you would walk away from that interaction. A lot of people would be thinking, wow, that person just laid it all out there for me. Oh my gosh, I don't even know them, right? Think of all the ways that you would respond if someone told you how they really were and if they weren't okay. So the reason that I'm saying this is because there might be days where you're that person who's not okay. Someone else that you're talking to might be that person who's not okay. And we want all of you to know that that's okay. It's okay to not always be okay. And when I show you the facts on the next slide, I'm hoping that it will help you realize that these things, these mental health issues are very common and they affect so many people each day that therefore we should be able to normalize talking about them. Okay, so these are facts. It is a fact that mental health problems affect 1 in 5 people every year. So even if you don't have a mental health problem, it's likely that your friend, family member, coworker, someone that you know is affected. Number 2, individuals with mental health difficulties do live fully functioning lives. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, carpenters. No one is immune to mental health issues. Mental health does not discriminate. Many people can and do recover from mental health problems, but sometimes they need help. They need help from the support of family and friends. They need professional help, right? These are all things that are really important for individuals to feel good and be able to move forward in their mental health or substance abuse recovery, okay? The next fact on this slide says that alcohol is the most misused substance in the United States, okay? According to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, nearly 15 million Americans have been diagnosed with an alcohol use disorder. Okay, so it's pretty high, but I think that we can understand why alcohol use is so commonly misused. It's legal. It's like stress. People say, hey, you want to have a drink? That is like typical of people in our society, right? Much like it was normal to talk about stress, people are comfortable talking about their alcohol use, using alcohol, things like that. And so we could see that then it gets misused. And then the last fact on this slide says that you can help someone who is experiencing a mental health problem. Okay. Okay. So if behavioral health issues are so common, 1 in 5, we're talking about, different examples of people talking about mental health. Why are they not talked about more? Okay, so if behavioral health issues are so common, why don't we talk about it? This right here, okay, there is a stigma. In a recent survey, 58% of people said that the stigma and discrimination that they experience when dealing with a mental health issue is equally as damaging or harder to deal with than the illness itself. So think about that. It's one thing to be depressed. It's one thing to feel anxious. But people are reporting that it's actually just being stigmatized. 87% of people with a mental health problem report experiencing some type of discrimination related to their mental illness. Okay. So many successful people, including actors and actresses, sports stars, they've come out and talked about their difficulties with mental health. Maybe you work with someone that's been brave enough to share their mental health challenges with you. As I said before, it's all around us. Mental health doesn't discriminate. It's actually the one common factor that people from all walks of life experience. If you think about it, it's a lot like the pandemic. The pandemic established a common ground for everyone. It was a shared experience for all of us, regardless of, as Ian and Joe said in the video, regardless of race, class, gender, identity, anything like that, we were not immune to it. We all lived through the pandemic, and we're not immune to mental health either, especially if you think about it on that continuum, like we talked about a few minutes ago. There's going to be periods in our lives where our status on the continuum changes. Okay, and so one image on this slide here in front of you in the middle is one of my favorites. It says, what we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. Now, the reason that I really like this one is because when we look at the statistics, they're so high of people who experience mental health issues. As I said to you when we started, I'm a licensed therapist. I talk to individuals all the time who are struggling. So something that seems so typical, so common, like a mental health issue, it sounds like it's a part of being human, right? We're not going to be perfect all the time. There are going to be days where we feel sad. There are going to be days where we feel anxious. There are going to be days where we don't make the right decision. And so if this is such a huge part of who we are, then the last thing that we need is the judgment and the stigma. Because when you think about it, those are actually not helping us at all. Okay. So let's talk for a minute about stigma in the workplace. What does that look like? Well, oftentimes people report being afraid to disclose a mental health issue, a substance use issue, or that they're struggling in general in the workplace out of fear that they will be seen as weak, right? Like it says here in our little bubble. Maybe I'll be perceived as weak or crazy. Maybe it could harm my career if I ask for help and admit that I'm struggling. People often think that leadership might treat them differently. Okay, so 68% of individuals that were surveyed in 2019 reported worrying that reaching out about a mental health issue could negatively impact their job security. Okay, so what does stigma in the workplace look like? It probably looks like not asking for help. And the reason, again, that people don't ask for help is because they're afraid. They don't know what that looks like if they do, if they set themselves up for vulnerability. Okay. So who is reaching out for help? This slide looks at baby boomers versus millennials. So baby boomers, let's start there. Baby boomers, when surveyed, were less likely than any other generation to feel comfortable having a discussion about mental health, okay? Only 32% of baby boomers reported that, surveyed of course, reported that they were comfortable talking about mental health. 62% of millennials said that they were comfortable discussing mental health issues. So you can see even the huge disparity between the groups, okay? So the people experiencing the mental health challenges, based on this research on this slide by the American Psychiatric Association, the people who are experiencing the mental health issue are not always comfortable talking about it. And guess what? Neither are we. We're not always comfortable starting that conversation, okay? 86% of individuals identified at least one barrier that could stop them from approaching someone at work who might need mental health support. So someone's at work, they identify that their colleague just doesn't seem like themselves. And people reported that they don't bring it up. They look the other way. And the reasons for that are because they feel awkward and they don't want to offend anyone. And think about it. We could all understand what it would be like to be in that position, right? We could see feeling awkward. We could see not wanting to offend someone. So, I mean, it makes sense, at least for me, when I was reading this back, that this is what the literature found, because it does make sense. But by us not saying anything, we're actually saying a lot. We're feeding into that stigma that if you ask for help, something might happen. Maybe people will view you differently. Maybe you'll, be negatively affected at work. I don't know what it is, but we all know the stigma. We can all think of it. And this is really concerning. Okay, so before we jump into the slide on depression, Max, I'll check in with you again. How are we doing on your side?
It's quiet over here.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the mental health issues, and we'll see how we do from there. Okay. So the first one that we're going to talk about is depression. Okay. Now, the word depression is used in many ways, right? People sometimes will say that they feel sad. It's okay to feel sad. There are different things in your life that might cause you to feel sad or down or blue, right? When bad things happen. Maybe you're just feeling a little bit of that Eeyore syndrome, right? The character, where things are just not really going your way. And we like to identify that as situational depression. So you had an event that caused you to feel sad, and it'll more than likely go away without you seeking professional help, right? So you can recover from it, you know how to cope, and it's just something that you're experiencing temporarily. That clinically wouldn't warrant a depression diagnosis, okay? So major depressive disorder, in order for it to be clinically diagnosed, it would need to last for at least 2 weeks and affect a person's ability to work, carry out daily activities, and to have satisfying personal relationships. So look at some of the symptoms that are here on this little chart in front of you on the slides. Sometimes when people are depressed, they experience physical symptoms like they're sick, they're run down, they have difficulty sleeping, they're not eating. Maybe they're gaining weight, maybe they're losing weight, maybe their body hurts. I know we've all seen the commercials where they say depression hurts. People talk about a physical pain or like a heaviness or weight that they feel like they're carrying. Okay. In terms of the behaviors, you might isolate from people. You might not enjoy things that you once did. Okay. Thoughts. You might have different thoughts like, my life's not worth living. Nothing good ever happens to me. My future looks bleak. I'm worthless. And then feelings. You might feel overwhelmed. You might feel unhappy. I talk to people all the time that say, I just started feeling numb. Things that used to bring me joy just don't anymore. Okay. Frustrated, indecisive. And so from a clinical perspective, again, if you're getting clinically diagnosed, then you would need to have at least one of these symptoms nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. Now, the reason that I hesitated there was because I don't want you to feel like even if you're not able to be clinically diagnosed with depression, that your experience isn't worth seeking help. That's not the case at all. People can feel sad, they can feel irritated, they can feel anxious, you can feel a wide range of emotions, and you can still get someone to talk to and ask for help. So just want to make sure that we make that clear. So again, in order to be clinically diagnosed with depression, you must have at least one of these symptoms nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. The symptoms again are unusually sad mood, maybe isolating, loss of enjoyment, lack of energy, maybe you're tired, you can't get out of bed, feeling worthless, thinking about death or wishing that you were dead, talking, writing, or posting things about suicide or death, poor concentration, agitation, right? So there's a whole range of different emotions that you might be feeling if you're experiencing depression. So think about how this would impact you. Well, it's going to impact your emotions. You might be having mood swings, right? It's going to impact your thoughts. You might be, like in this slide here, having a lot of negative self-talk. Maybe you're suddenly telling yourself that your work performance isn't as good as it used to be. And you're not that good at things, or whatever the negative self-talk is, it could be a result of depression. Maybe your behavior is different. Maybe you're having crying spells that you never had before. Maybe you just don't feel like going out with your friends. You're just withdrawing and you don't feel like going out. Maybe you're neglecting your responsibilities. You haven't showered in a while, or the bills are piling up, okay? And then physically, like we said, chronic fatigue, pain, weight loss, headaches. These could all be symptoms of depression. So again, the reason that we want to make sure that you have all of this information is so you can identify it in yourself or in your loved ones, okay? Because for all of these mental health and substance use issues, early intervention is the best approach that someone can take. Okay, so up next, we're going to talk about suicidal thoughts and behaviors. So on our slide here, we have a couple symptoms of suicidal thoughts, warning signs. So the first one is talking about feelings of hopelessness or having no reason to live or go on, okay? The second one is making a will or giving away personal possessions. The third, exhibiting reckless behaviors, such as excessive alcohol or drug consumption. The fourth is avoiding social interactions with others. The fifth, expressing rage or intention to seek revenge. And then the last one that we have listed is appearing anxious or agitated. Now, suicide's hard. It's hard to talk about because it's scary, okay? It's one thing to overcome those fears and the stigma and say, hey, I'm depressed. It's another thing to say, hey, I wish I was dead, right? That often intimidates us, and the idea of talking about it is even scarier, okay? Now, if you see someone that's exhibiting these warning signs, the one thing to know is that if they have a plan, it does indicate a more serious risk, okay? However, the absence of a plan is not enough to ensure that they're going to be safe. So all thoughts of suicide should be taken seriously, okay? Now, some extra risk factors that would make a person more susceptible to attempting suicide would be, are they using alcohol or drugs? Because this can make people more impulsive, okay? Have they attempted suicide in the past? A previous suicide attempt makes someone more likely to try again or complete suicide, okay? So you need to take action to help keep the person safe or keep yourself safe. So one thing to remember is that you don't ever want to agree to keep someone's suicide plan a secret, okay? Talking about it could help them. Now, one thing that is important for me to say is that myself as a therapist and you all as the individual who's here learning about behavioral health and maybe thinking that you're going to help a loved one, the most important thing to remember is that you're going to do your best for that person. You're going to do your best to try and help them. But at the end of the day, despite your best efforts, some people will still die by suicide, okay? And we say that not to have you be afraid to talk about it. We want you to talk about it. Now, there is a common misconception that talking about it will give someone the idea and cause them to do it. And I want you to know that there is no truth in that, okay? Talking about suicide could actually help someone. Talking about it could save one person. And if it saves one person, then that's enough reason to talk about it. It is total myth that people believe that if you talk to someone about suicide, or if you ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself, that you're going to trigger them to do that, okay? And that is not true. All right, so I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding about that. You're not going to give someone the idea. You're not going to cause them harm by talking about it. We would want you to talk about it, okay? Despite how scary it might be to bring this up to someone, if you're getting the sense that someone is not okay, ask them, okay? All right, so the next one that we're going to talk about is anxiety. Now, anxiety is thrown around a lot, right? You hear people all the time say, oh, I'm anxious, or I have OCD. OCD gets thrown around all the time. But what actually is anxiety? Well, we have a lot of the symptoms here on our slide for you. And the symptoms include an increased heart rate, rapid breathing, restlessness, trouble concentrating, difficulty falling asleep, racing thoughts. So these symptoms must cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, academic, occupational, or other important areas of functioning to meet a diagnosis. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't seek help just because you're not technically meeting this criteria, okay? So if you're struggling with anxiety, certainly get help. There's a couple different kinds of anxiety that are common. Hypochondriasis. So we hear people all the time say, oh, you're such a worrier about your health. You think that you have all these things wrong with you, right? So maybe we know someone who tends to be a hypochondriac. That's one type. The second type, like I said a few minutes ago, is OCD. People tend to throw that one around incorrectly very often. And sometimes people have different phobias, right? You might hear someone say, oh my gosh, I have a fear of flying or a fear of heights. So anxiety is all around us. If you look, you hear about these things all the time. So what happens when it becomes an anxiety attack? Anxiety attacks sometimes lead people to the emergency room, okay? Oftentimes I'll meet with clients and I'll say, oh, what brings you in? And they say, I thought I was having a heart attack or some type of medical emergency. And so I went to the emergency room and they told me it's anxiety, right? And it's like they're disappointed. And I'm like, wait a minute, they told you that you weren't having a heart attack, but you're disappointed to be here in my office telling me it's anxiety. So again, it's that misconception that physical health is okay, mental health is not. Okay, so anxiety, symptoms of an anxiety attack could be fainting or feeling dizzy, shortness of breath, dry mouth, sweating, hot flashes, numbness or tingling. Okay, so it's anxiety. Okay, so switching away from mental health and into the substance use side of things, we are going to talk about substance use disorders. People use substances to increase feelings of pleasure or decrease feelings of distress. Now, if you remember when I started this webinar tonight, I told you that the pandemic triggered a lot of people to try to cope by self-medicating with substances, okay? So again, those unwanted feelings of where is this going? How long is this 2-week quarantine really going to be, right? And then the 2 weeks turned into a year plus. All of these unwanted feelings, people started to turn to substances at a higher rate than they typically would, okay? So when we refer to someone with a substance abuse problem, we talk about them, the term is substance use disorder, okay? So what we want to do is we want to avoid using terms like drunk, alcoholic, drug addict, because those words are very stigmatizing. And like we talked about, we're trying to get away from that stigma, okay? And it's what the person does. They abuse drugs and not who they are, okay? So we don't want to label them as the drunk, the alcoholic, the drug addict, okay? Different substances affect the brain in different ways. So we're going to talk about alcohol first. So we have here this chart, right? And it says at the top how many standard drinks are in each. And we have your 3 ounces of liquor, your 40 ounces of malt liquor, 5 ounces of wine, a 25 or so ounce bottle of wine, and then your 12-ounce bottle of beer. And underneath, we have the alcohol volumes in each. Okay, so think about it. How many standard drinks are in each? Now, sometimes people will look at these drinks and say, well, that's one drink in our glass that's on the left-hand side. That's one glass of wine, and that's one bottle of beer. Okay, but that's actually not true. And so you guys can write in the chat and guess if you want. We can just take a few seconds if anybody wants to guess at any of these. I'm sorry, it's hard because we're virtual and I can't just have you call out your numbers. But if you want to guess either in your head or in the chat before I give you the answers, we could do that. Next, did anyone have any guesses that they wanted to share?
Everybody's a little shy.
Okay, no problem. Maybe they're just guessing in their heads, which is
That
cool.
could be.
What'd you think?
Yeah,
We're good? Okay.
they could be. We're good.
All right, I'm going to tell you the numbers and see if they're surprising at all to you. So in our 3-ounce glass of liquor, there's actually 2 standard drinks in that glass, okay? In the 40-ounce malt liquor bottle, there are 5 standard drinks. The glass of wine is 1 standard drink. In the 25+ ounce bottle of wine, there are 7 standard drinks. And in the 12-ounce bottle of beer, there's 1 standard drink. okay? So oftentimes what you think that you are drinking and what the standard are completely different, okay? Now, using alcohol or other drugs, it doesn't mean that the person automatically has a substance use disorder, okay? Like we said, alcohol is very commonly used. People use it to socialize, people use it to unwind, things like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem, but it's when these things become problematic, for lack of a better term, and we're going to look at that on the next slide, is when you would be, identify it as a substance use disorder. So it's important to note that substance use disorders are more than twice as common in males than they are in females. They often co-occur, so coexist with mood disorders. Anxiety can go hand in hand with substance abuse because, again, they're trying to self-medicate, and different psychotic disorders. So as we've already said, many people use substances to try to self-medicate their symptoms. So they might be having unwanted symptoms of anxiety, depression, so on and so forth. And so therefore they try to consume alcohol or use substances to make themselves feel better. Okay, so early intervention is key. It's easier for someone to recover from a substance use problem if it's detected and treated early, rather than after they become dependent on the substance. So we're going to talk a little bit here about the difference between abusing a substance and becoming dependent on a substance. Okay, so abuse can lead to dependence, but not always. So weekend warriors, right? You've all heard the term at some point in your life. You've heard this term weekend warriors or binge using substances. So it's a person who might go out and drink a lot on the weekend and abuse alcohol, or maybe they're having a binge of some kind of drug that they recently relapsed on. Okay, so they're abusing the substance. They're consuming more than the standard dose, right? They're consuming a lot, they're consuming large quantities, and they're definitely abusing the substance. However, they might not be dependent on the substance, okay? So substance abuse leads to problems at work. Maybe you're not performing as well because you're showing up either under the influence or hungover. Problems at school, problems at home. Oftentimes, people present for substance abuse problems because their significant other gave them an ultimatum, right? Because there are problems at home and in their relationship. They might be having health problems as a result of this. Alcohol has a very high rate of leading people to the emergency room. If you Google the statistics if you're interested. So your health might be compromised because of this, or legal problems, okay? Someone might have gotten a DUI. So that would be categorized as abuse. Now, when we go into the dependence section, when talking about substances, think of it as a tolerance, okay? So someone might be building up a tolerance and now they're experiencing withdrawal symptoms. So using larger amounts over a longer period of time can lead you to experience withdrawal when you try to cut down or control the use, okay? If the person gives up or reduces social interactions, occupational responsibilities, recreational activities because of substances, then they're dependent on them, okay? They need them to function, so to speak. And we have to remember that with a lot of the substances, the dependence is happening within your body. So even if you said, okay, I'm going to put down my drink, I'm going to put down my drug of choice, your body might be saying, not without feeling sick, you're not, right? And sometimes withdrawal can be really dangerous. And again, that's one of the reasons that we want to talk about utilizing your benefit tonight and getting connected with the resources. You don't have to go through that withdrawal alone. There are different programs and professionals that you can talk to help you be able to manage your substance abuse and dependence, okay? All right, so how can you remain resilient? How can you remain healthy? How can you be mentally healthy, right? Physically healthy, because if you're abusing some of those substances, we talked about how they would affect you physically. We want you to remain resilient. what can you do? There are 4 things that we're going to talk about tonight that you could do. One is practice self-care. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. The second one is seek help when needed. And we've been talking about that on a lot of the slides, right? Asking for help. The third is maintaining and enhancing your social network. So fill your circle with people who are good supports for you. And the fourth is knowing the resources that are available to you. Okay. So first up, we're going to talk about self-care. Okay. So what is self-care? Self-care is one of those terms, again, that we throw around a lot, right? We say, oh yeah, I practice good self-care. I read a book or I rode my bike. Okay. But what is it? Self-care is actually the mindful taking time for yourself. Okay. So it's intentional. It's intentional. It's mindful. You're aware of it. It's not like, oh, I sat in the sun for 30 minutes at my child's soccer game. Well, you weren't there for you. You were there for your child, and you just so happened to get this benefit of the sun and vitamin D. Okay, so self-care has to be about you. When we don't care for ourselves, we get depleted, and then we're not able to be our best selves to everyone else. Okay, so, oops, sorry, did I change the slide on you? Okay, so the slide here says that if you're planning to fail, if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail, meaning that you have to think about things ahead of time that make you feel good. You want it to be like your self-care toolbox, so to speak. So what activities do you enjoy that support your overall well-being? What can help reduce stress for you, make you feel more energized, and restore your health? Okay. So there's a little acronym that's on here that says, don't get to HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed, or sick. Okay, so look at the first one, hungry. How many times when you're stressed do you tend to eat poorly, right? You don't have time. You're too stressed. You don't have time to make a healthy meal. You're just going to go through, I don't know, the drive-through on your way home, or you're going to eat a bag of chips and a donut because it's quick and you're stressed and you don't feel like it. Well, this is what you're fueling your body with, right? So if you're putting things in that aren't good for you, they're probably not going to help you feel any better. Okay. Next up is angry. Okay. So sometimes when people aren't caring for themselves, they get irritable. And if it's accompanied with a mental health issue like anxiety or depression, you might be more likely to be irritable. Okay. And this is not healthy for, again, your body, but also for your mental and emotional state to just be angry all the time. So you want to think about how you can manage that. Lonely. Are you feeling disconnected? Now, during the pandemic, this was really hard. Or maybe it is, right? I know that some people are moving towards socializing again, but some people might be afraid still, and that's okay. But are you feeling disconnected as a result of it? If you are, maybe it's worth reaching out to someone. I know a lot of people during the pandemic had gone to Zoom hangouts with their friends, right? I know that we played trivia with our friends once every other week, just say on a Friday night. And it was nice to reconnect. So there are ways to feel connected without directly meeting up in person if you're not comfortable doing that right now. I'm tired. You want to make sure you get your hours of sleep, okay? Poor sleep can lead to issues like obesity, depression, heart attack, and stroke. So you want to make sure that you are getting good quality sleep and enough of it, but not too much. It's all about the balance. And then lastly is stressed or sick, right? And those are pretty obvious. You want to make sure you're not stressed, which we've been talking about the whole time, or sick for an extended period of time. And being stressed for an extended period of time can lead you to be sick. Okay. So again, you just want to make sure that you create a plan for yourself, like a little self-care toolbox, that when you're feeling symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, when you realize you're turning to substances to try to self-medicate, you can grab your self-care toolbox and you can implement some of the healthy behaviors and activities that are in that toolbox that you know make you feel better. Okay. And you just want to be smart about setting the goals. You want to remember to be specific in what you say you're going to do. Because if you're not specific and you don't plan for it, you're not going to do it. Let's face it, we're all creatures of habit, right? So you need to plan for it. It needs to be realistic for you, okay? I was telling a lot of my clients when we were at the height of the pandemic, don't tell me that you're going to go to Barnes & Noble and read a book as self-care, because Barnes & Noble's not open, right? They don't want you there right now. It's the pandemic. So that is not going to be an effective means of managing your self-care. Okay. Additionally, I hear people all the time just say, exercise. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to go out and run 3 miles. And I tell them, have you ever run 3 miles? No. Okay. Well, if you are not interested in exercising, if you are not interested in running 3 miles, then don't put it on your self-care plan. Okay. You're not likely to succeed at that goal for yourself. And just make sure that they fit your schedule. If you want to go to a 5 p.m. kickboxing class, but you typically work till 7 p.m., then that's not going to work for you. Okay. So having a plan is important, and you want to just adjust it as you go, as you need. Okay. So the last thing I just want to highlight for you again are the resources. You want to make sure that you utilize the resources that are available to you. So the Carpenters Health and Welfare Funds, both in Philadelphia and New Jersey, are happy to field any calls that you have about resources that are available to you or a loved one in terms of getting help with your behavioral health needs. Okay. MHC, that's my office. Our phone number is also on here, and our email address. And these things are always available to you. Like I said, if you just go through the Carpenters, you can get in touch with us. Our website is mhconsultants.com. And if you want to write down the phone number, it's 1-800-255-3081. We are here. There's an on-call clinician 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for any of your behavioral health emergencies. And you would just be getting connected with a licensed clinician like myself, one of my other colleagues here, and we would be happy to point you in the right direction. Under your behavioral health benefit through MHC, you do have the same coverage that applies on the medical side on the behavioral health side. So you have your unlimited number of sessions with an in-network provider covered at 90%. So you have that 10% co-insurance, which for therapy is very affordable. And it's a really good opportunity to utilize the benefit if you haven't thought about doing so already. Okay. And again, here's just our back to the beginning slide. So Max, how are we doing on your side? I know we're right at the 7 o'clock mark.
We do have one question that I guess you can read and address if you'd like, or we could read and address it privately. You know, it's a more in-depth question. It's a longer conversation for sure.
Okay, so let me just take a peek here. Oh, somebody did give us their examples of the alcohol. Thanks. I'm sorry I didn't see that. Thank you for participating. So what I'm going to do with this question, just because it is very personal, so let me see if I can just briefly answer part of it. But what I would recommend doing is calling MHC. So to this person who wrote in their question, definitely call MHC, and we're happy to problem solve this with you and get you connected with the resources. Let me see if I could just get the gist of it here quickly and share, you know, the answer with everyone. It's a great question. It's actually one that I don't know the answer to. So it's more about policies and like statewide, right? So the main part of the question is just asking, what are elected officials and union reps doing to help alleviate the stigma of state medical marijuana programs? I really don't have the answer to that one. I'm not sure what the elected officials are doing. I think it's great that this person is curious about it, you know, because it could probably benefit a lot of people, and not just this individual who shared this question that it has a personal connection to them. A lot of people could probably benefit from having this information. So unfortunately, I don't know. But I do appreciate you sharing the question. And like I said, if you are comfortable reaching out to MHC, we could definitely connect you for support with a licensed counselor who could talk about these things more with you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can just make sure I didn't miss anything else here. Any other questions? We appreciate you all logging on tonight and being a part of this webinar. If not, then we'll end it there. And like I said, if you need anything, feel free to reach out to us at MHC, the Carpenters Health and Welfare Funds of Philadelphia and New Jersey. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then you're all welcome to sign off. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a good night. Okay, do you want to stop the recording, Mac?